Hello and thanks for joining us for this episode. In today's video, we'll be looking at 3 cases with unusual and strange twists you hopefully won't see coming. We find these to be the most interesting cases to cover and are always on the lookout for more. If you know of any cases with bizarre twists, we'd love to hear about them. You can suggest them on our website, criminallylisted.com, then go to the Suggest a Case page. You can also suggest cases for our podcast, Into the Killing, and our other YouTube channel, Paranormally Listed. So we really hope you enjoyed this video. But before we start, I want to tell you about something that I've been really enjoying lately, and that's this amazing game called Scatter Slots, who's sponsoring today's video. I love playing slot games, but I always find the visuals to be bland and didn't speak to my personality. Diamonds, fruits, the number 7, boring. Then I found Scatter Slots, and I fell in love with it. They use dark fantasy and fairy tale visuals that grab my attention. Scatter Slots is the top free-to-play casino app, and it's the only adult slot casino app where you can find these amazing, hot characters. Not only are the visuals mind-blowing, but the game is also incredibly fun. It's the perfect game if you have any traveling coming up because you can play it offline. Last week I was on a 2-hour train trip to a different city. I started playing Scatter Slots and the time just flew by. It felt like one of the shortest train trips of my life. I'm not the only one who loves Scatter Slots. They have 10 million active players worldwide. There are so many ways to play, like multiplayer tournament mode and a single player adventure mode. You can also play a mode called Clans with your friends so you can win more. Start your own clan or join one and then take on bosses to win amazing prizes. Also, with over 200 slots, the game has a ton of variety, so it never gets boring. So what are you waiting for? Check out Scatter Slots today. It's available for iOS and Android. If you download Scatter Slots via the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen, you'll receive a huge bonus, 12 million free coins. So please download Scatter Slots for free today because you'll have fun and you'll be supporting Criminally Listed in the process. Number 3. Antoine Taylor. In the spring of 2003, 27-year-old Antoine Taylor, who lived in Chicago, Illinois, was a member of the street gang, the Black Pea Stones. On the night of March 22, 2003, he went to a store in uptown Chicago with a fellow gang member, 24-year-old Ronnie Bolden, and Bolden's 16-year-old girlfriend, Monique Boykins. After getting out of their SUV, a man dressed in black approached them. Suddenly, he opened fire. Taylor was shot. Bolden and Boykins started to run away. Bolden was shot as well. After he had been shot, the man aimed a gun at him and pulled the trigger, but the gun jammed. The man pulled out another gun, but Bolden was able to get away. Boykins escaped uninjured. Bolden was taken to the hospital and he survived. 27-year-old Antoine Taylor was killed. There were no arrests in the weeks after the murder, but the police thought a fellow gang, like the Vice Lords, might have committed the murder. A month after the shooting, they arrested several Vice Lords during an undercover drug sting. One of them was Melvin Hughes. He told the police that he had been to the store before the shooting and saw the killer. He was a fellow gang member, Kevin Dugar. Kevin's criminal record stemmed back to when he was 17. His convictions included street fighting, disorderly conduct, and gang loitering. In January 2000, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison for selling crack. At the time of the shooting, he was out on parole. Ronnie Bolden was shown a photo lineup which included Kevin's photo. Bolden picked him out of the lineup. He told the police he had known Kevin for over 10 years and knew he was the shooter. He initially didn't tell the police because he was worried about reprisals from the Vice Lords. 4 days later, the police had Kevin stand in the police lineup. While he was in the lineup, he said, quote, "Please, I didn't do it. Don't put me in jail," unquote. The detective running the lineup told him to shut up, but Kevin repeated what he said. Boykins identified him as the shooter. The detectives interviewed Kevin. He was asked where he was on the night of the murder. He initially said he was at his mother's house. Kevin had a girlfriend, and she talked to the lead detective. She told him that Kevin was with her in Pennsylvania. They had been there living together. Kevin then admitted that he had been in Pennsylvania. He had not said anything earlier because he wasn't allowed to leave Illinois as part of his parole. But then later, Kevin changed his story a third time and said he was at a party at his parents' house. Kevin's lawyer encouraged him to take a plea deal. He could plead guilty to second-degree manslaughter and get an 11-year sentence. With time served awaiting trial and credit for good behavior, he could be out in 3 years. Kevin refused to take the plea deal because he claimed he did not commit the murder. At the time, Kevin was 27 and he was a new father. His lawyer told him that if he went to trial and lost, he could get a sentence that would ensure that he would never see his daughter grow up. Still, Kevin refused to take the plea deal. He went to trial in March 2005. The only evidence against him were the testimony of 3 witnesses. One was a nurse who was driving in the area and saw the shooting. However, she said it was too dark and did not see the shooter. The next person to testify was Monique Boykins. While she was on the stand, she was asked if she saw the shooter in the courtroom. She said she didn't know who the shooter was. She said that she never got a good look at him. Boykins explained that she was 16 years old at the time of the shooting. She repeatedly told the police that it was too dark and that she did not get a good look at the shooter. They kept her in the police station for 15 hours and she wanted to go home. So she just did what she was told and identified Kevin as the shooter. When she was cross-examined, she said that another witness, Ronnie Bolden, had threatened her twice to say in her testimony that Kevin was the shooter. Bolden testified next that he said he was certain that Kevin was the shooter. 29-year-old Kevin Dugar was found guilty of first-degree murder and attempted murder. In May 2007, he was sentenced to 54 years of prison. Kevin always maintained that he was innocent. After serving his sentence for selling crack, he left the gang. Before the murder, he had a short affair which resulted in the birth of his daughter. He was ready to commit his life to his girlfriend, a woman he had met in high school. He had violated his parole when he moved to Pennsylvania to be with her. By October 2003, Kevin had been in prison for 10 years. This included the 2 years he spent in jail while he was awaiting his trial. He then got a letter from his brother, Carl. Carl was his identical twin. In 2008, Carl was convicted for a home invasion where a 6-year-old boy was shot in the head. The boy's father was kicked into unconsciousness, stabbed multiple times, and shot twice. Both the father and son survived. Carl was serving a 99-year sentence. The letter in part reads, quote, "Sorry it took so long to get at you, little brother. A lot of shit has been going on in my life and in my head. It's just a lot going on, Kevin. I'm about to start my post-conviction in a minute. Hopefully I get some rhythm. Oh, and my daughter, about to enter high school soon. Look, Kevin, I'm being around the bush with you on some shit. I've been keeping a secret for years, and I have to get it off my chest before it kills me. Man, I don't know where to begin with this shit, so I'll come clean and pray that you forgive me. First off, I'd like to say I'm sorry for all these years you've missed out on your daughter's life, and also for all the pain you've endured over the last decade or so. You know the case where you were found guilty and you swore you were being set up on? I know you was telling the truth about not having anything to do with it, because I'm the one who shot and killed those 2 Blackstones on Sheridan that night." Unquote. Kevin had always wondered if Carl was the shooter. He even asked if he did it before he went to trial. Carl said that he wasn't the killer. Carl had supported his brother by visiting him in jail while he awaited his trial. Carl and Kevin looked very similar, even for identical twins. Sometimes family members had problems telling them apart. When they were young, they would dress like each other and take each other's places to confuse friends and teachers. In the Vice Lords, they share the same nickname, Twin. Ronnie Bolden, who swore that Kevin was the shooter, knew that Kevin was a twin. Bolden claimed that he knew the difference between Kevin and Carl. He said that the shooter had a braided beard and Kevin was the twin with a braided beard. But there's no evidence that Kevin ever wore his beard braided. Based on his twin brother's confession, Kevin filed an appeal. 3 years later, in autumn 2016, there was a hearing. The presiding judge was the same one who sentenced Kevin. Carl testified at the hearing. He said on the night of the shooting, his parents were hosting a birthday party. His brother, Kevin, was at the party. Carl said around 7:45 p.m. he changed into all black clothes. Then, he and his friend, Gabriel Curel, went to meet another friend to buy some marijuana. Curel was the one driving. They drove to his friend's apartment building, which was near the store where the shooting happened. Carl said as he was walking to his friend's apartment, Ronnie Bolden and Antoine Taylor pulled up to the store and got out of their vehicle. Carl said he thought Bolden was pulling out a gun, so he pulled out his gun and fired 6 or 7 shots, and then the gun jammed. He pulled out another gun and fired 3 more shots. He then ran back to the car where Curel was waiting. They went to a liquor store and then back to the party. Curel also testified. He claimed that Carl was lying to get his brother out of jail. Curel said that he was not at the party that night and he did not drive Carl to or from the shooting. However, Curel may have been lying because he had a grudge against Carl. He even admitted at the hearing that he hated Carl. When Carl confessed to shooting Antoine Taylor, he was serving a 99-year sentence for a violent home invasion where a man was badly hurt and his 6-year-old was shot. Curel was the man who was kicked unconscious, stabbed multiple times and shot, and it was his son who was shot in the head. Curel said that he hated Carl, but what he said was still true. 2 years later, in October 2018, the judge denied the petition for a new trial. He said that Carl's testimony was not credible. Northwestern University's Center on Wrongful Convictions then took up the case. They filed another appeal arguing that the jury might have reached a different verdict had they heard Carl's confession. In April 2021, the 3 appellate court judges reached a verdict on the appeal. They voted 2-1 to grant Kevin a new trial. He was granted bail, and on January 21, 2022, Kevin Dugar was released from prison after serving 19 years for a crime he did not commit. The district attorney has not said if they will retry Kevin. His lawyer, Ronald Safer, said that if they do, they will vindicate him at trial. Kevin Dugar holds the justice system responsible for him spending nearly 19 years in prison and not his twin brother. He said, quote, "I love my twin brother. It wasn't my twin's fault. I was locked up," unquote. Number 2, Mary Jane Marquette. On March 13, 2000, 54-year-old Mary Jane Marquette was at home in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. Mary Jane was married and had 3 grown children. Mary Jane's husband, Alfred Marquette, was at work that day. Alfred usually called home midday while he was working. He called at 11:50 a.m. and got a busy signal. He called throughout the afternoon and continued to get a busy signal. He became worried, so a little after 4 p.m. he left work early and went home. He found his wife on the garage floor. A blanket was covering her, and there was a pool of blood under her body that had spread beyond the blanket. Alfred called 911. Mary Jane had been shot in the temple with a 9mm. She had also been stabbed twice, once in the head and again in the neck. The police did not find any signs of forced entry. Nothing had been stolen, and the house had not been ransacked. Initially, the police were suspicious of Alfred Marquette. He did not seem upset that he had just found his wife of 35 years dead on the floor. The police thought that the use of the blanket was odd. The killer had gone into the house, into the master bedroom, and brought it back out to the garage. This suggested that the killer was comfortable with the house. The killer also didn't appear to be in a hurry, suggesting that they knew Mary Jane and Alfred's routine. Also, according to the detectives on the case, it's not uncommon if the killer is a family member for them to cover up the face or body of the victim. However, Alfred had a solid alibi. He was at work all day. Also, no forensic evidence connected him to the murder. His fingerprints were found in the garage, but that wasn't proof that he killed her because it was his garage. Alfred was asked if he knew anyone who would want to hurt his wife. He said that his wife was a kind woman who got along with most people. He didn't know anyone who would have wanted her dead. Alfred mentioned something that the police thought was worth investigating. While no one wanted to hurt his wife, he thought that someone might want to harm his son, 24-year-old Bill Marquette. The last time he had talked to Bill, which was about 2 weeks before the murder, he said he had to leave the area because some people were after him. The police considered the possibility that the people who were after Bill came to the home looking for him and ended up killing Mary Jane. Bill lived in a cabin in Fairchild, Wisconsin. The police tried calling him, but they could not reach him via the phone. Then they went to his home, but he wasn't there. They talked to his neighbors, and one of them had a disturbing story. On March 9, 2000, 4 days before Mary Jane was murdered, their children came home from school and discovered that the glass in the front door had been broken. One of the children entered the house and found that their dog had been shot to death. Nothing in the house had been stolen. Like Mary Jane, the dog had been killed with a 9mm handgun. The police then began to suspect that Bill might have been the one who killed his mother. He broke into his neighbor's home first and killed their dog, possibly as a practice run for when he killed his mother. 2 days after the murder, the police got a search warrant for Bill's cabin. They took the door off its hinges and entered it. At the time, nothing of interest was found in the cabin, but on the property there was a storage unit. In the storage unit, there was a large plastic sheath that was covered in blood. In another part of the storage unit, they found the dead bodies of 3 dogs and 3 rabbits. They had all been shot to death. The police believe that Bill was the person responsible for the murders of the 4 dogs, the 3 rabbits, and his mother. 5 days after the murder, Bill returned home and neighbors saw his car. They called the police. The police surrounded the cabin and Bill refused to come out. They put tear gas in the cabin and then Bill emerged. He was arrested for animal cruelty and he was brought to the police station. At the police station, they collected his shoes, which had bloodstains on them. He also had a folding knife in one of his pockets. On the knife was blood. He was questioned about his whereabouts for the past 5 days. He told them he was on vacation in Florida. When he was asked if he knew why he was arrested, he said, quote, "Is it about the dog thing?" unquote. They informed him that his mother had been murdered, and he did not show much of a reaction. He then asked for a lawyer. After Bill was arrested, he was held in jail. The same day Bill was arrested, the police searched his cabin for a second time. They also searched his vehicle. In the car, they found a shirt with bloodstains on it. On March 29th, 11 days after Bill was arrested, the police searched his home for a third time. Under the refrigerator, they found 2 boxes of ammunition and a 9mm handgun. Ballistic testing confirmed it was the murder weapon. DNA testing was done on the shoes, the knife, and the shirt. Mary Jane's blood was found on all 3. Bill Marquette was charged with murder. Bill underwent a psychological evaluation, and several psychiatrists diagnosed him with schizophrenia. A judge did not think he could aid in his defense, so his murder trial was delayed. In January 2003, he went to trial for animal cruelty. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity. He was sentenced to 75 years in a psychiatric hospital, and he could apply every 6 months for a conditional release. Another 3 years went by, and then in May 2006, Bill Marquardt went to trial for his brother's murder. The prosecution felt like they had a strong case. The gun used to shoot Mary Jane was found in Bill's home. Mary Jane's blood was found on the knife in Bill's pocket, and her blood was on the shoes he was wearing when he was arrested. Also, her blood was found on his shirt in Bill's car. The defense argued that Bill was being framed for murder by people he had cheated on a drug deal. His lawyer pointed out that before the murder, Bill told his parents that people were out to get him. His lawyer also pointed out that the cabin was searched 2 times, but the gun wasn't found in either search. When the gun was finally found during the 3rd search, Bill was in jail. There were no fingerprints on the gun. The prosecution had no explanation for why the gun wasn't found during the first 2 searches. The defense argued that the police developed tunnel vision for Bill. For example, when they tested the shirt with the bloodstains, they only tested the blood spots. They did not find Bill's DNA on it. If he had worn it during the murder, it probably would have had his DNA on it. Therefore, the shirt was planted. As for the shoes, although he was wearing them when he was arrested, Bill said that they did not belong to him. Also, the knife in his pocket was his mother's, which he used to cut fish. It also did not have Bill's fingerprints on it. Bill testified on his own behalf. He said at the time of the murder, he wasn't in the area. He had left for Florida the day before the murder. He said he returned home 5 days later, early on the morning of March 18th, and saw that the door to his cabin was off the hinges. He said that after entering the cabin, he discovered his house had been trashed. He said he found the folding knife on the counter and grabbed it for protection in case whoever trashed the house came back. He put the knife in his pocket. He grabbed a bunch of clothing and his Nintendo and put them in the car. He planned on fleeing, but he had just spent 20 hours driving from Florida, so he wanted to sleep. He barricaded the door, removed his boots and pants, and slept. When the police arrived at his home, he put on his pants, which had the knife in the pocket, and he put on the shoes that were closest to him, which were the ones stained with blood. The prosecution attacked the idea that Bill was being framed. The police initially searched his cabin on March 15th, 2 days after the murder and 3 days before he was arrested. The gun, the knife, the shoes, and the shirt were not there. When he was arrested on March 18th, he was wearing the blood-stained shoes and the knife was in his pocket. The same day he was arrested, while Bill was in custody, they searched his cabin for a second time, along with his car. This time they found the bloody shirt. The gun was found during the 3rd search, which was conducted on March 29th, 11 days after Bill was arrested. He had not been out of jail since his arrest. If Bill was set up, the killer needed to enter the home after the police search on March 15th, but before March 18th, and plant the knife, the shoes, and the shirt. Then, after he was arrested, they planted the gun. Why not plant all the evidence after the murder? Why wait several days to plant some of the evidence? Why would they plant the gun after 2 searches? It's possible that the police may not have conducted a 3rd search. It was illogical and needlessly risky. It made more sense that Bill had the gun, knife, shoes, and shirt with him after murdering his mother. After the murder, he left town for a while. When he returned to the cabin, he had the gun. Then the police simply missed the gun on the 2nd search. Finally, the defense had one more key witness in the case. It was a man who had recently come forward. He said he drove by the crime scene around noon on the day of the murder. He saw a van that seemed out of place. He also saw a man with long black hair in a ponytail who was not Bill. The trial lasted for 5 days. Then the jury deliberated for 3 hours. They found Bill Marquardt not guilty. The district attorney, Joe Theisen, was very unhappy with the outcome. It was his first murder trial, and he thought that they had a strong case. The fact that 12 people took 3 hours to agree that Bill was not guilty shocked him. Since Bill had been acquitted, Theisen would never be able to try him again for the murder of his mother. There was something about the case that bothered Theisen, besides the fact that he believed that Bill got away with murdering his mother. On the knife, the police found DNA that belonged to 2 other women who were related. They were either mother and daughter or sisters. During their investigation, the police tried to find crimes where 2 related females were attacked with a knife in the area around Chippewa Falls, but they did not find any suitable cases. So they thought that Bill may have used the knife for something like a ritual. After the acquittal, Theisen decided to follow up on the blood samples. According to Bill's statements to both the police and on the stand, he left for Florida before the murder. So Theisen started looking for unsolved murders of 2 related females in Florida. He found one that had eerie similarities to the murder of Mary Jane Marquardt. On March 15, 2000, 72-year-old Margarita Ruiz and her 42-year-old daughter, Esperanza Wells, were babysitting Esperanza's niece and nephew at Margarita's home in Tarrytown, Florida. Just after 1 p.m., a man came to the back door and shot Margarita twice through the screen door with a 9mm handgun. The 72-year-old woman ran towards the bedroom, and the man chased her. He shot her in the back just as she got into the bedroom. In the bedroom was Esperanza. He shot Esperanza once in the head from about 1.5 feet away. He then stabbed both women in the neck. Margarita was stabbed once, and Esperanza was stabbed 8 times. Neither child who was in the house was physically harmed. The similarities jumped out to Theisen. All 3 women were killed in their homes in the middle of the day. They had all been shot with a 9mm handgun and stabbed in the neck. The murders of the mother and daughter were committed 2 days after Mary Jane was killed and 3 days before Bill was arrested. By Bill's own admission, he was in Florida when the 2 women were killed. Theisen called the lead detective on the case and told him about Bill Marquardt. Theisen asked the detective if they had any physical evidence from the double homicide. The detective said they had shell casings and they found a drop of blood that contained DNA from an unknown man. Bill's gun and knife were still in evidence, and they also had Bill's DNA profile. It was all sent to the investigators in Sumner County, where Tarrytown is located. The blood on the knife belonged to the mother and daughter. A ballistic expert was sure it was the gun used in the double homicide. Finally, the DNA from the blood drip was Bill's DNA. In December 2006, Bill was indicted for the murders of 72-year-old Margarita Ruiz and 42-year-old Esperanza Wells. Bill Marquardt went to trial in October 2011. Bill surprised everyone when he chose to act as his own lawyer. Once again, Bill claimed that drug dealers were framing him. The trial lasted 6 days, and then the jury deliberated for 2.5 hours. This time, the jury did not believe that Bill was set up. He was found guilty of both murders. After he was convicted, he said he wanted the death penalty. His wish was granted in March 2011. Bill Marquardt maintains that he is innocent. He said he'd rather be dead than have people believe that he killed 3 women in cold blood. No motive for any of the murders has ever been established. Some investigators believe that Bill had strong homicidal urges and he gave in to them. At the time of this recording, 48-year-old Bill Marquardt is sitting on death row at the Union Correctional Center in Rayford, Florida. No execution date has been set. The investigators in both Chippewa Falls and Sumner County think it's possible that Bill had not been acquitted of the murder of his 54-year-old mother, Mary Jane, the murders of 72-year-old Margarita Ruiz and 42-year-old Esperanza Wells may have never been solved. Number 1. Olga Duncan. Olga Kupchak was born in March 1928 in rural Manitoba, Canada. Her father, Elias, was a railroad section foreman. His job caused the family to move around several times when she was a child. Olga spent most of her teenage years in Vancouver, British Columbia. In 1956, she got her nursing certificate. In October 1957, Olga relocated to Santa Barbara, California to work at Cottage Hospital. She took the job because it paid well and the weather was nice. In late 1957, 53-year-old Elizabeth Duncan was admitted to the hospital after overdosing on barbiturates. Elizabeth told the doctor she attempted to take her own life after an argument with her son, 30-year-old Frank Duncan. Frank was a criminal defense lawyer. He and his mother had always lived together. The fight was because Elizabeth had purchased a beauty parlor without talking to him first. He told her to move out of the apartment that they shared. Elizabeth asked if she could spend one more night and leave the next day. Frank told her that was fine. That night she overdosed on the pills. One of Elizabeth's nurses was Olga Kupchak. When Frank visited his mother in the hospital, he became smitten with Olga and they started dating. In the spring of 1958, Olga discovered that she was pregnant. On June 24, 1958, the couple was married at the courthouse. They moved in together several weeks later in July, but they only lived together for several months. In early November, Frank moved out. On November 17, 1958, 30-year-old Olga Duncan was nearly 8 months pregnant. She had two fellow nurses over to her apartment that evening. They left around 11:10 p.m. The next morning, Olga did not show up for work. Frank was notified and he reported her missing to the police. The police checked Olga's apartment and found no signs of a break-in or forced entry. They also did not find any signs of violence. The police had Frank go through the apartment to see if anything was missing. He said some luggage was missing. Frank told a reporter that he thought that Olga might have left town on her own. She possibly went back to her native Canada, but the police did not believe that was the case. They found her identification in the apartment. Also, Olga was known to be responsible and wouldn't have abandoned her job without telling anyone. She did not give any of her friends or family any indication that she was going anywhere, and no one had heard from her since she went missing. The police surmised that Frank probably killed her and disposed of her body. After all, the couple was estranged. Their relationship was also a bit complicated. They got married 7 months after meeting because Olga became pregnant. Perhaps Frank didn't want to pay for alimony and child support for a wife and child he never wanted. Also, Frank was a defense lawyer, so he knew more about the law than the average person. He would have known that getting a murder conviction is incredibly difficult without a body. Frank did not have a great alibi for the night of the disappearance. At the time, Frank lived in the same apartment building as his mother. He told the police he was watching TV at her apartment. His mother confirmed his alibi. A few days after the disappearance, Frank brought Elizabeth to the police station. Elizabeth told the investigators that she was being extorted by Esperanza Esquivel, the wife of one of Frank's clients. Esquivel's husband had been looking at several years in prison, but Frank managed to get him just a year. They had paid Frank $500 for his services. Elizabeth said that Esquivel was upset that her husband got any jail time and that Frank made money from it. Esquivel owned a bar called the Tropical Cafe and Bar. Elizabeth said that a few days before Olga went missing, Esquivel said a man forced her to come into the bar. When she got in there was another man in the bar. Elizabeth was told she needed to pay Esquivel $500 or they would throw acid in Frank's face. Elizabeth said she was ordered not to tell Frank about the extortion scheme. Frank, who was there when the police interviewed Elizabeth, said they were trying to extort his mother because they thought they could intimidate her. If they had threatened him, he would have gotten them arrested. Elizabeth said she pawned some rings for the initial payment. Then Frank gave her a check for $200 that was meant to be an installment payment for a typewriter he had recently purchased. Instead of making the installment payment, she kept $50 and gave $150 to Esquivel's men. When Frank discovered the payment had not been made, Elizabeth told him about the extortion scam. The police then considered the possibility that Olga was kidnapped on the orders of Esquivel. Elizabeth looked at some mugshots, but she could not identify the two men involved in the extortion. Elizabeth agreed to have a recording device attached to her phone. When the police hooked up the device, Frank told them to leave some mugshots because his mother might recognize the men if she had a chance to study the photos. About 2 weeks later, on December 3, 1958, Frank called the police. He said that one of the extortioners had called that day while he was out. However, his mother had failed to record the call. Frank did have some positive news. His mother had picked out one of the extortioners from the mugshots. It was a photo of 23-year-old Luis Moya. Moya had been in and out of prison since he was 11. At the time, he was on parole for selling marijuana. He was brought to stand in a lineup, which Elizabeth viewed. She did not identify Moya as the man who was extorting her. So the police continued to investigate. The police talked to Olga's landlord, friends, co-workers, and family. They learned something surprising. Elizabeth had loathed her daughter-in-law. She disliked Olga for the time she cared for her as a nurse. One reason was that Elizabeth didn't like foreigners. When Frank and Olga started dating, Elizabeth was furious. She did not think that Olga was worthy of her son. Elizabeth called her at the hospital to harass her. She discovered Olga's home phone number and called her there as well. According to one letter Olga wrote to her parents, Elizabeth called her 5 or 6 times daily. Elizabeth told her she wasn't good enough for her son and she should stop seeing him. She told her that she should go back to where she came from. She even threatened to kill her. Elizabeth also freely talked about hurting and killing Olga to anyone who would listen. She told one person she wanted to throw acid in Olga's face. Elizabeth also convinced Olga's landlord to let her into her apartment when she was not there. She looked around to see if Frank was keeping any of his clothes there. She supposedly told the landlord that Olga would not steal her son from her. After the failed police lineup, the police talked to one of Elizabeth's friends who lived in the same apartment building as her, Emma Short. Short told the police that Elizabeth had forbidden Frank from marrying Olga. Frank promised her he would marry her. On the day they were married, Elizabeth called the hospital to harass Olga. But the person who was working that day said Olga wasn't there because she was getting married. When Elizabeth found out that they secretly got married, she told Short she was going to kill Olga. Emma Short told the police that about 2 months before Olga went missing, Elizabeth hired a 25-year-old ex-convict, Ralph Winterstein, and had him pose as Frank. They went to court, and Frank said she was Olga. She said they never consummated the marriage, so they wanted to have it annulled. The annulment was granted. Frank supposedly learned about the annulment the day after it happened. But this didn't split up Frank and Olga. Short said that Elizabeth had asked several people to get rid of Olga. They all turned her down, but no one went to the police. Short said she went with Elizabeth to the Tropical Cafe and Bar where she met Esperanza Esquivel. Esquivel introduced her to Luis Moya and Agustin Baldonado. Elizabeth offered them $6,000 to get rid of Olga. They agreed to drive Olga to Tijuana, Mexico, and kill her there. She pawned her ring so that they could get a car and a gun. But then, after Olga went missing, Elizabeth had a problem. She didn't have $6,000 to pay the hitman. So Moya and Baldonado were threatening her. Elizabeth took the check that was meant for the installment payment for the typewriter and used it to pay them some money. When Frank found out that his mother didn't pay for the typewriter, she couldn't tell him that she paid hitman who killed his wife, who was 7 months pregnant with his child, and that's when she came up with the story that she was being extorted. On December 13th, 1958, the police arrested Elizabeth for fraud for the annulment. The police also arrested 20-year-old Luis Moya. On December 14th, 26-year-old Augustine Baldonado was arrested. When they were arrested, their friend, James Rojo, was in jail. Rojo was arrested after he ran a red light. He didn't have a driver's license or the car's registration. Also, the car was missing the front license plate. The car was impounded. Rojo then found out that Moya and Baldonado had been arrested for Olga's disappearance. Rojo told the police that he knew the two men. On the night Olga Duncan went missing, the two men rented a car from their mutual friend, Sarah Contreras. Also, that same night, they borrowed a handgun from him. When they returned the car to Contreras, the back seat was badly damaged. Parts of it had been ripped up and several areas had been burned. They returned the pistol to him with a broken handle. The car Rojo was driving when he was arrested was the car that they borrowed, and it was still impounded. The same day that Baldonado was arrested, a police chemist checked the car and found blood in the back seat. The police talked to Esperanza Escoval, who connected Elizabeth with Moya and Baldonado. She said early on the morning of Olga's disappearance, the two men came to her home and their clothes were covered in blood. On December 21st, 1958, the police interrogated Augustine Baldonado. According to the book A Lovely Girl by Deborah Holt Larkin, Baldonado started by saying that they didn't know that Olga was pregnant. Had they known that, they probably wouldn't have agreed to kill her. Baldonado said that Moya went to Olga's apartment door. He told her that he had been drinking with her husband, Frank, and he was passed out in the car. Olga went down to help Frank get out of the car. Baldonado said that it was him in the back seat. He was leaning over and covering his face. When Olga looked in the back seat of the car, Moya hit her in the back of the head with a .22 caliber pistol. Baldonado said that he pulled Olga into the car. Then they started driving. They planned to go to Tijuana, where they would shoot her and leave her body. But they had problems with Olga. She screamed and fought. So they stopped the car and beat her into unconsciousness with a gun. Then they bound her wrists with tape. Then they kept driving. Anytime she came to, they would beat her again. The gun's handle broke during one of the beatings, and it couldn't be used to shoot her. They were driving an older car that was not in good condition. They started having car problems and knew they would not be able to reach Mexico. So they drove to the mountains near Oaxaca, California. They dragged her out of the car. Then the two men took turns strangling her. When they thought she was dead, they dug a shallow hole. They had never intended to dig a grave, so they didn't have a shovel or anything to dig with. So they had to dig with their hands. Then they put Olga in the hole and covered it with dirt. They drove back to Santa Barbara and disposed of their bloody clothes. They also tried to clean out the back seat. When they couldn't get rid of the blood, they cut out and burned parts of it. After confessing, Baldonado led them to the body. A month after she went missing, the body of 30-year-old Olga Duncan was found. The medical examiner discovered dirt in her lungs, so it's likely she was buried alive. 2 days after the body was found, Luis Moya also confessed. The story was just like Baldonado's version of events. On December 26, 1958, Elizabeth, Moya, and Baldonado were indicted for Olga's murder. Elizabeth's trial started on February 24, 1959. Elizabeth testified on her own behalf. She claimed that she didn't have anything to do with the murder. She said that Moya and Baldonado had killed her and tried to blackmail her by saying they would pin the murder on her. During the trial, some bizarre details about Elizabeth's life emerged. She admitted that she had been married 10 or possibly 11 times. The prosecution alleged that she was married at least 16 times. Many of the marriages were scams. She would tell a young man she was expecting an inheritance but needed to be married to receive it. She said in exchange for marrying her, she would give him some money. Then, after they were wed, she would extort them in exchange for a divorce. Initially, Elizabeth testified that she had 2 children, Frank and a daughter who died when she was 15. But she later admitted that she had 4 other children, 3 daughters and a son. She was asked if she loved Frank more than her other children, and she admitted she did. There was also some testimony regarding the bizarre relationship between Frank and Elizabeth, which was central to Elizabeth's motive for killing Olga. Many people said that she was in love with Frank and even obsessed with him. After he became a lawyer, she would go to his court cases and cheer after he won. However, people also noticed more disturbing aspects of their relationship. For example, even when Frank was an adult, they held hands publicly. One woman who testified was Betty Lou Brantley. Brantley had been friends with Elizabeth. One day she told Elizabeth she was having problems providing for her 3 children. 2 of the children were not her husband's children. They were conceived while he was away serving in the Navy. Elizabeth told her she would help by finding someone to care for the 2 children. What Brantley didn't know was that Elizabeth arranged for the 2 of them to be adopted by a couple who lived in Oxnard, California. Frank, who was a lawyer, prepared the paperwork. Brantley said that she didn't know that the papers she signed were putting her children up for adoption. Brantley said that Elizabeth once asked her to drive her in Frank's car to Stockton, California to visit her son, Dewey Tessier Jr., whom she had not seen in years. Brantley agreed, and the 3 of them spent the night in a motel room with bedrooms on either side of the living room and a kitchen. Brantley testified that she slept in the living room. Elizabeth was in one bedroom and her son Dewey was in the other bedroom. Brantley said during the night she was awoken when Elizabeth went into Dewey's bedroom. She then heard what she described as, quote, a ruckus, unquote. She said it made her sick, so she went to the kitchen. Something that Elizabeth said earlier in the day stuck with her. Elizabeth supposedly said that, quote, given time, she could have Dewey doing just exactly like she had Frank doing, unquote. Brantley said that when Elizabeth came out of the bedroom and entered the kitchen, she asked Elizabeth what she was doing. Elizabeth just laughed. Brantley said she was so disturbed by the incident, she refused to drive back with Elizabeth. Elizabeth was asked about the incident, and she denied it ever happened. She said that Brantley was the one who went into Dewey's room. She dragged Brantley out of bed because she didn't think that Brantley was the type of woman who should be in bed with her son. Frank said that he had lived with his mother his entire life except for when he lived with Olga. He denied that the relationship with his mother was incestuous. The trial lasted nearly a month and it was a media circus. It also attracted a lot of spectators. Throughout the trial, the prosecution implied several times that Elizabeth and Frank had an incestuous relationship. But ultimately, Elizabeth was not on trial for sleeping with her sons, so the prosecution did not need to prove that. Instead, she was on trial for murder. The star witnesses were Luis Moya and Agustin Baldonado, who said that Elizabeth hired them to murder Olga. Several other people also testified that Olga tried to hire them to kill Olga. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 51 minutes. They found Elizabeth Duncan guilty of murder. 4 days later, she was sentenced to die in the gas chamber. Luis Moya and Agustin Baldonado both pleaded guilty, and they were also sentenced to death. While his mother was on death row, Frank fought to save her life. The trio was scheduled to die on August 9, 1962, about 3 years after being sentenced. Frank ended up filing a last-minute appeal, but was rejected. After hearing that the appeal failed, Elizabeth, who was dubbed Maud Duncan by the media, remained calm. She asked where Frank was. She also told the warden that she was innocent. Then she was led to the gas chamber. At 1:12 p.m., 58-year-old Elizabeth Duncan was pronounced dead. Frank did not attend the execution. 3 hours later, 23-year-old Luis Moya and 28-year-old Agustin Baldonado were led to the gas chamber. They both choked along the way. They were both pronounced dead after about 10 minutes in the gas chamber. Elizabeth Duncan was the last woman to be executed in California. She was only the 4th woman to be executed in the state. It was also California's last mass execution. Frank Duncan was never implicated in the murder of his wife and unborn child. Frank later remarried but got divorced. He continued to be a lawyer, but he was disbarred in 2022. Frank Duncan is about 95 years old at the time of this recording. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Please don't forget to check out our new channel, Paranormally Listed. There's a link on the screen now, and there's a link in the description box below this video. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.